Okay, I think we probably could start now. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll just accept there's going to be some latecomers, and that's fine. It's only a minute after. So thank you for being so punctual. This is 1 hour, primarily to enable constituents this week to raise any questions and seek answers as you start your impact assessment on the CR2, which relates to the Replan. And the intention this week is to make sure that we support you in starting those impact assessments. So we're not going to present a lot of stuff here today. We want to maximise the opportunity for questions and answers, and therefore we will do a brief run through of particularly where it pertains to changes since round 3, just by way of context. But the intention is to do that relatively quickly. So in terms of the timings on this one, they're probably worst case. I would hope we probably get to Q&A well before the 30-minute mark on this session. If I could ask for questions to be held until the Q&A session, if that's okay, it can just allow me to get through the front end of this call as quickly as possible, and then we can come back to any slides that people particularly want to look at. So if we go forward to the main elements of this one, so the change request itself was presented at PSG, and it was agreed to go out, as you'll be aware, for impact assessment. The first day of impact assessment was the 6th of April, and the timetable for the impact assessment has been slightly extended so that all participant impact assessments should be back by the 26th of March. So this is a summary of what is in the plan under CR. At this stage, it was always intended to reset the program once the core capability providers were all in place and the design was essentially baselined. So this is the point at which we would expect to be doing this exercise. Since the decision document originally, and in the time since August 21, there have been significant changes to the planned approach. Primarily, the changes are, there's a number of them. Participants in this plan can proceed more at the pace of their own choosing, with the earliest not being held back. This has been a quite significant change to the plan as we've been going through the rounds of consultation, and obviously it has both positive and negative impacts, and obviously we want you to articulate those in your responses to CR22. The SIT strategy in itself, there have been some quite significant decisions recently which act to preserve M9 and also get the programme moving into the next phase expeditiously. But that is a change from what was originally envisaged. And we've basically allowed for a staggering of entry into CIT for participants that will go through SIT, and most notably to accommodate MPRS during that 4-month CIT window. On equivalence, participants going through SIT, as an assumption at this stage, will not have to undertake qualification testing, although they will still have to do their qualification assessment documents and any DBT2 for system of processor changes that won't be tested in SIT or qualification testing. That's an assumption at this stage. It is a conversation that's going through governance, and we do believe that that is a reasonable assumption to make at this point. Equivalence is not intended to produce additional risk, as the co-bodies will be independently reviewing and cross-checking the SIT tests with the qualification testing tests to ensure that risk is managed from an enduring operational perspective. So there is an assumption that there is equivalence, therefore, pending these final conversations in the SIT qualification test work streams, and the documents that are going through governance are being reviewed by the code delivery bodies before being issued. On placing reliance, non-SIT participants may, where appropriate, place reliance on testing done earlier by other participants. This policy is going through to TMAG this month, and we expect it will be approved on the 19th of April, and then subsequently it will go to delivery bodies for approval. In the qualification work stream, as another manifestation of phasing for the non-SIT participants, there will be 7 tranches of qualification, accepting LDSOs who carry out their qualification testing earlier. The non-SIT participants have, after completing their PIT activities, they take the option to join qualification testing through one of these tranches. On migration, again, this is phased. It'll start with the participants who complete SIT, and thereafter will mirror the phased nature of the qualification delivery through the tranches. And on reverse migration, that was decided in conversations at PSG in November and ultimately December. And reverse migration allows SIT and qualification to run over a more extended period without prejudicing consumer choice. So those are the main changes that have happened through this period of developing the replan and consultation and resulting in the proposal that we've now made. On the interim plan, there has been a need to articulate the programme's vision and delivery strategy, and the interim plan's been used for some time now, but obviously it's not viable over such a lengthy period of time. So we are keen to get this plan, this programme plan, re-baselined and use this as soon as we're able to. On round 3, we've got a good response rate. We've got good insights, and those have provided a basis for the final CRs with a few variations. But as we said at the end of last year, in the calendar quarter of this year, first calendar quarter 1, we wanted to let the plan be guided increasingly by industry consensus via the programme governance bodies, so the working groups, the advisory groups, which is why some of the changes in the plan will hopefully be ones that industry recognise and buy into. The plan itself is fundamentally predicated on getting the right minimum mix of participants to conduct SIT, essentially the minimum viable cohorts, and we believe we'll achieve that based on engagement and feedback from participants so far. And generally, the plan, will be live when we rebaselined it, and it will be subjected to controls change as we drive to manage risk, and that is normal in any programme. And we're not saying that won't be, because there may be CRs against the plan, potentially even sooner rather than later, because there are a number of uncertain elements, CRs going through, design decisions, so on, that could impact the plan. So we are, keeping the door open to the fact that there may be changes to the plan, but at least subsequent changes will be able to be impact assessed against the proper industry agreed baseline plan. So the plan acknowledges risk, which is why in some places we have date ranges for key milestones. It's important to recognise that there are a number of places where risk might result in changes to milestones. Whilst we are not anticipating that, and our assumption are that that won't happen, we have put into the plan date ranges around key milestones like M10 and subsequent big milestones that may change depending on the way in which we manage risk going forward. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Okay. So this slide, which you will have seen if you looked at the PSG papers, it sets out how the timelines have evolved since the CR9 and the through the planning consultation rounds to this eventual proposal post round 3. This shows how our proposed plan is largely that which was shown in round 3, although, as I say, the date ranges show risk around M10 and therefore also later and consequent milestones. In our proposal, there's a general assumption that if M10 does move, later milestones will similarly move. And whilst subsequent milestone movement may be lessened, we've not made allowance for that at this stage, and we've shown the worst case that if M10 moves, then all subsequent key milestones would move by the same amount as M10 for the purposes of the plan. We intend to reach M16 by December 26, but bearing in mind this milestone is a long way out and is potentially affected by the cumulative effect of the delivery risk in all the programme to that point. There's obviously some some still going to be some uncertainty at this stage around the later milestones. And there's a 2-month gap between M15 and M16. This is a stabilization period where we'll watch the system to check operational metrics are right before passing that milestone in 16. Coming back to an earlier part of the plan, and we have extended CIT by a couple of weeks to accommodate some important drops of MPRS at the start of CIT. And essentially, MPRS bookends the CIT because there are drops at the start and drops towards the end of CIT. So basically, CIT has been reprofiled to manage the risk that we had declared earlier was an issue. But at this stage, we believe that that's a reasonable place to be in terms of the plan. We have revisited assumptions around the duration of the regression testing in SIT, which is why the overall duration of SIT is unaffected despite the slight delay on CIT. Okay, if we could move to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is the top level of the proposed plan. It's primarily a refresh of round 3. There are 3 critical paths shown through here. There's the, if you like, technically the actual critical path, which is the hard red line, which takes us all the way through the plan to M16, based on the timescale taken to get through the last tranche of qualification. There is, with a heavy dotted line, a critical path that goes through the MVC, through SIT to migration, and reaches start of migration at M10 and M11. And finally, there is a critical path that takes you through first qualification tranche through to migration. So it's very similar to the way that we represented the plan in round 3. There are a number of key risks that we've decided are important enough to call out at this top level. Risk 1 is that the core capability providers are ready, of course, because there's a risk that some may take longer to get through their pit. And the first ones to get into CIT are DIP and Helix, and we'll be carefully monitoring the progress of those key parties' progress towards SIT. Risk 2 is the composition of the MVC, which is critical. We can't progress this plan without an MVC in place. We do expect to have some depth in the volunteer community for SIT by the 23rd of May, which is when we draw a line under this subject. And at that point, we would expect to have not only sufficient SIT volunteers for an MVC, but further volunteers for SIT that we can draw upon if we need to expedite SIT as quickly as we can. Risk 3 is the test data readiness. It's one of the biggest risks the SI is managing right now, that we get the appropriate quality data required to be on test environments ahead of SIT. An initial approach and plan for this was aired at last week's SIT working group and will be followed up at the data working group later this month also. It does include a move of the milestone for data extracts to be taken, a slight delay from June to August, which should alleviate some risk ahead of SIT. Risk 4, the plan's quite sensitive to any movement or new dates for SIT functional and SIT migration. Obviously, for SIT migration, there's a timeline risk related to the impact of the migration approach and migration design on some migration-related DBT activities, notably NPRS. And that's definitely something we'll be keeping an eye on. Risk 5, and this was the change in round 3, all LDSOs need to qualify by M10 to ensure national coverage. So the timeline is set out separately in the plan because it's an area of focus, and LDSOs will be the first to engage in the qualification type activities. In risk, dotting around a bit, but in risk 9, the assumptions around the qualification testing duration for each tranche have been agreed with the co-delivery bodies, which is 6 months for qualification activities and 2 months for governance. Governance being PAB, environment updates, moving from staging into production. So those are the basic assumptions we've agreed, and you may argue that they are sufficient or not, but that's the consensus that we have at this point. In risk 7, we may get some bunching towards the end of qualification from the slower participants, and we'll need to monitor that risk closely. In risk 6, suppliers, contracted parties, if they haven't been through SIT, if those parties haven't been through SIT, will need to qualify for the supplier to fully get into migration. So that's again a risk that will be looked at and managed through the programme. In risk 8, suppliers with larger volumes of MPANs to migrate should be seeking to start migration sooner rather than later, and we'll look for ways to support that. But obviously, what we don't want is larger volumes of MPANs are being left towards the latter parts of the migration period, because we have extended that migration period per round 3, but we've made some specific assumptions about how we would get the migration done within that timeline. And that relates to risk 10, where we've modelled scenarios and made assumptions, also from using previous programs such as faster switching, which shows we need to allow the 18 months to affect the migration. We're assuming two large suppliers in SIT, which would be 5 to 10 million MPANs available to be migrated from April 25, and possibly 12 months to get that done, and would mean roughly 20 million or so migrations to be MPANs to be migrated after qualification, with that qualification conducted via 7 tranches, with the first tranche starting migration in September 25, and with 12 months to complete that. So the last people will get through qualification by the end of March 26, and we assume 6 months for them to complete that, and then migration ending end of Q3, start of Q4 26. That's basically the assumptions and risks in relation to the plan at the top level. We could move on, please. I'm going to whistle through the next because we need to get to the questions, but just very briefly talk about design, build and test. If we start with design, build and test, so on design assurance, the approach to the design assurance is new since round 3 and has been communicated via DAG and via the specific webinar last month. It's important to engage all the potential SIT participants as early as possible to gauge the areas of concern and to target those participants more deeply as we move towards SIT. The initial questions will focus on participants' designs and any related dependencies. We're not seeking to duplicate questions in other areas being conducted through working groups and so on. But one of the benefits of volunteering for SIT will be the likelihood of early engagement with the SI's design team for the purposes of assurance. And assurance, as has been explained previously in the webinar, is not just about asking questions about your design, but providing support and dealing with queries around the design. So it is very much something we see as a benefit to early adopters in the programme that are going through SIT, that design assurance can provide that further level of support to ensure that you get through your DBT in the best risk managed way and identify potential risks early. If we move to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is the timeline for design assurance. So the question set is going out today, and SIT volunteers or those potentially wishing to volunteer must complete this questionnaire to start the process, and has been explained on the back of the question. The answers that we get will then be able to follow up in the areas where we think we need to provide the most scrutiny and support. It's not mandatory for non-SIT participants to follow the timeline at the back, at the bottom of the slide, which starts on the 9th of May. We do recommend it. You can complete it later, but we think earliest engagement would be a good thing for everybody. So we are asking you to complete that also if you're not going to SIT, but we will follow up and reissue later in the year if that's the way you want to go. Next slide, please. Okay, it has been previously raised that DBT 1 and 2 need to be clearly understood in the context of the plan. The material has been covered through working groups, so one would hope at this stage that it is clear. But just to reinforce that DBT 1 are the DBT activities required to enter into either SIT or qualification testing, depending on which path you're taking. This is a program requirement, and it will be design assured and test assured by the program according to the approach we are following. However, DBT2 are system and process changes delivered by participants that will not be tested in SIT or qualification testing, but are needed for MHHS, such as consequential change. This is an obligation of all participants, SIT and non-SIT, that will be assured by code delivery bodies via the qualification activities. So hopefully the way in which we've positioned this is clear in the proposed plan that we've sent out and the change request that we have sent out. If we move to the next slide, please. I'll have to speed up, I think. So on the test approach and plan, we recognise that we've been a little behind the curve in clarifying the programme's approach to test data ahead of testing. We are now devoting much more time and effort to moving this forward, and it is progressing now, per the content discussed at SIT working group last week, and that will be discussed at the data working group later this month. A key point to note is that our plan now indicates that participants' data cuts need to be complete by 24th of August, whereas originally we'd said June. And the proposed plan at the moment is somewhat assumptions-based, and we do look forward to your impact assessment and in parallel, your contributions to working groups as we move to re-baseline the plan and get the test data approach and plan more articulated, and the overarching test data and approach and plan is due next month. Moving on. Okay. So on the SIT overview approach, I think people are probably tired of seeing this one because we've been very clear about the minimum viable cohort and how that will be utilised through SIT. So I'm not going to present this specifically, but just to make the point that, as I said earlier, we have changed the date by which participants must declare that they are committed to participating in SIT. So we moved that from the 21st of April to the 23rd of May. Of course, we would very much like participants to volunteer earlier than that, but to volunteer and also to be included in the fast track implementation group, you need not only to volunteer, but as we've said in previous PSGs, you need to have produced and provided a plan, a credible plan, that shows that you can actually meet the timescales for SIT. And the fast track implementation group will be starting up. First incarnation of that will be on Friday. Moving quickly on, SIT objectives and principles. You've probably seen this in the implementation approach already, so I'd rather skip and move to slide 16. So this is more an explosion of the SIT part of the plan. Just to note that we do have uncertainty around D170 and the impact of some of the CRs which are in flight at the moment, such as 17 and 18. There may be changes, therefore, and which, if those changes are agreed, they may impact on the plan for functional testing and or migration testing in the SIT phase. Each of those streams of activity do converge at the core systems code freeze. Therefore, if SIT functional or SIT migration testing were to be prolonged, that could impact on the critical path to the programme, since the core systems code free would have to be moved to the right, and it's just a risk to be aware of at this point. Moving on to slide 18. So the qualification overview, the draft approach and plan has been out for a while now. So you'll be familiar with the way in which the code delivery bodies are expecting to manage qualification. So this is really just an exposition of how this will work and who's responsible. This hasn't primarily changed very much in recent times, so I don't think I should call out anything specifically here, other than that this is for completeness, the approach that is being assumed as far as the plan is concerned at this stage. And again, if you have views on this via the impact assessment, they would be welcome. Moving on to slide 20. So the code drafting overview as well. Just for completeness, we've included this approach in the implementation approach document, which is the main, I think it's 77 odd slide deck that went out with the artifacts, and there's a plan also in slide Gantt chart and a schedule in slide 21 in relation to that. Slide 21 will catch up with me in a minute. Okay. And then very, very briefly, moving on to transition and migration, we have the reverse migration approach, which everybody's familiar with, and the deliverables which are in the plan to provide support for that. And finally, in slide 24, the transition design approach, which again should be familiar and is part of the implementation approach that we sent out to you last week. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I felt it would be worth just setting the context at the start of this. And I'd like now to be quiet really and offer the opportunity for anybody on the call to ask questions that might help you in terms of either understanding the plan or starting to produce your impact assessments for CR22. So at this point, we work out who's going to be brave enough to raise their hand first of all. So we normally take hands in order. So Sean, thank you for starting the ball rolling.
Hi, good morning. It's actually Nigel. We're sat in a joint room, so it's Nigel Roberts. A couple of questions for you, Keith, on the plan and the milestone log. I've noticed that in the current version of the plan, columns text 27 and text 10 aren't shown. They were previously in round 3 of the plan, which is milestone related and milestone ID. I just want to make sure there's confidence that in the new version, those have been updated and we can, use those in our referencing. I don't know if it's something that you probably could answer off the top of your head, but in between the two plans, there's a difference in that some columns are hidden now that previously were exposed.
Yes. Are you saying columns in the MPP or the milestone log?
MPP, in the MPP.
Yes, that's partly so we don't confuse you. In order to get the documents out, there was still some work to do on the milestone IDs in the MPP, and we felt that the version of the truth you should be looking at is the one in the milestone log.
That then further begs the question, because I found a discrepancy in the milestone log in terms of the date that's in there. So it was the confidence between the two in that if you look at the what is the milestone of T2 TE0150, that's the SIP MVC SIP participants agreed, sorry. In the main plan, that's the 23rd of the 5th. But when you look at that in the milestone log, that's showing the 30th of April. And so, the confidence on the milestone log kind of took a knock, and I've only just started looking this morning. It took a bit of a knock when I kind of looked at the two, and they were so far adrift.
On that specific point, I said it's the 23rd of May. If there are detailed questions on the artifacts, just send a note to the PMO mailbox and they'll answer the question. Apologies for that particular oversight. I'm not sure where 3rd of April, it's never been the 30th of April, so I'm not quite sure how that happened. But we will take any feedback on specifics, and we will answer quickly any questions on details such as that. But the milestone names should be consistent in the MPP and the milestone log, and certainly the MPP should, as you said, show the right date.
Yeah, and the other concern I've got is when you look at that section we're looking at, which is tasks 930 to 933 in the MPP, the new MPP, you've actually got a task that occurs physically before something should have happened. It's kind of an impossible task. So if it's okay, I'll send it to the PMO, or should it come to yourselves?
Absolutely. Send it to PMO mailbox.
Okay, I'll do that this afternoon.
Thank you for being so quick to identify anything that might be at a detailed level a bit odd. And we will not only respond to you, but we'll look at whether artifacts can be, tweaked, and we may do a release depending on how It might be there's just one or two like that, or if there are further ones, we might take a view on whether we, reissue a particular artifact. But I'm not aware that there are wholesale changes to be made on that one. It's probably it's probably just human error.
Yeah, and it's more. I just managed to pick up an oddball just by chance, so
that's
I
great.
thought I'd raise it now. So thank you.
Yeah, but it's definitely 23rd of May, the SIT date for when we draw a line under the SIT community. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Happy to entertain other questions now that Nigel's broken the ice. Or maybe I've answered all the questions. As I say, there aren't, our view is that there are not that many surprises in what we proposed. The round 3 plan is well understood. Working group discussions since then have been fairly heavy and have gone into great detail, and we've modified the plan to align with the things that either have been agreed through working groups or we expect to be agreed through working groups. So I'm not really sure that we've covered anything that would be a big surprise, other than the fact maybe that we haven't changed the timeline, but that we always intended round 3 would be more or less there. The impact assessment's the last opportunity for you to, if you like, be consulted on the plan. So we do encourage everybody to submit an impact assessment so that we can complete the development of the plan and take it to PSG in May, for it then to be sent to Ofgem for their consideration. Does anybody have any further questions? Obviously, okay, we do have one. Tarek.
Yeah, just one question. Actually, Tarek, it's not as energy. On slide 54, risk 118, you've got a risk that there might not be enough volunteers to constitute a minimum viable cohort system for inspiration testing and the impact being high. So I want to understand, what is the impact of that on the plan if you don't have enough participants? And I assume you're probably worried about having that number of participants because of it's quite early in the plan to get people on board with that. Could you answer that question, please?
Yeah, well, our view of that risk is that it's a relatively low risk. We're more worried that we'll have a lot to manage it. The likelihood is we'll have far more than the MVC requires. But theoretically, there is a risk, of course, that if we don't have an MVC, we can't progress SIT as we plan to. So that it's there for completeness. But until at this point, there is a lot of expectation of having significantly more than we need in SIT. However, as was with PSG last month, there was the caveat that it would essentially depend upon primarily a reasonable outcome for replacing reliance policy. This was one of the main conditions that people articulated they were waiting for a resolution on before they committed to SIT. So we will let that happen. And in fact, the placing reliance policy will have gone through TMAG before anybody is required to submit their impact assessments. So one would at least expect that participants can give their impact assessments based on some certainty, even if the placing reliance policy still has to go through the code bodies. If it goes through TMAG, that gives us a certain amount of confidence.
Okay, so it's high impact, but low probability as far as you're concerned.
Precisely, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tarek. That's what I like, delivery language. Absolutely correct. It is theoretically, it would be a high impact because if we don't have sufficient SIT participants, we can't progress for SIT, and that would have a direct impact on the timeline in the plan.
Thank you.
I was about to say that if to fill the gap while people are thinking of questions, we will obviously there's a channel of asking your questions if you don't want to raise them here through the PMO mailbox, and we're very keen to do that. You can request through the PPC mailbox to have a bilateral setup and have a conversation about the plan. More than happy to do that, and we'll get the right people along to have the conversations with you. We just want to make sure you get the right level of understanding and support to be able to reply to this CR22. Ideally, we'd like everybody to apply, which would give us a problem, but it would at least give us confidence about how well bought in industry is to this plan, because what we do want, as I've rebaseline plan is a plan that industry buy into. This whole point of the program was to get something which was not imposed on industry, but agreed with industry. And without the impact assessment replies, we can't gauge how well industry is aligned with what we're trying to do here. So I think everybody is encouraged to do that as much as they can. And we're here ready to answer questions, either here through bilaterals, through emails to the PMO mailbox, whatever it takes to give you what you need to give us a reply on CR22. So, hopefully, at least by talking through the top level of this plan and the intent behind it, it's giving you some context to read CR22 now and respond to it. But if there are no more questions, I'm also happy to close the call a little early. So last orders, ladies and gentlemen. Well, thank you for so many people turning up. That is really appreciated. And hopefully it was at least somewhat helpful to you. And let us know if you need more help from us. Otherwise, we look forward to your replies to CR22 by or before the 26th of April. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.